Hello, I'm Robbie Mochrie, and today I'm going to introduce you to my textbook Intermediate Microeconomics. I'm going to assume that you have already studied some economics and that you know that microeconomics is about individual decision making and the behaviour of markets. If you ask most people to describe a market, they'll probably suggest something like this scene. There will be many people who are trying to buy goods. There will be some people who are trying to sell goods. But they come together in order to do that. In economics, this is the starting point for our analysis. We're interested in a situation in which there are many buyers and also many potential sellers of a good. When economists examine markets, we get rid of the individual buyers and sellers. The people simply vanish in this diagram. Instead, what matters to us is the total amount of the good, which will be bought at the market price, and also the total amount of the good which will be brought to the market at that price. So in this simple diagram, we have a market for tomatoes. I show the quantity of tomatoes on the horizontal axis and the price of tomatoes on the vertical axis. There is a downward sloping curve which shows how consumers' demand changes as the price of the good changes. There is a supply curve which shows how producers' decisions to bring goods to market change as the price changes. And at point Z, the two curves intersect. That point Z is particularly important because what's happening there is that the market demand curve and the market supply curve meet. We see the market clearing price and the total amount of the good which is traded. We say that at Z, the market clears because the total amount which is demanded is equal to the total amount of the good which is supplied. After trading takes place then, there won't be any leftover goods which producers have been unable to sell, but nor will there be any shortage, with consumers wanting to purchase more of the good at the current price. Now let's think about the market for one particular good, my textbook, Intermediate Microeconomics. It's a market in which I hope you're going to be a participant. You might think that it's not very much of a market. It's unlikely, for example, that you're ever going to want to buy more than one copy of the textbook. So either you buy a copy of the book or you don't. You might also point out that there are very few sellers of the book. Perhaps your choice is really simply this. You can either go to a campus bookshop or else you can buy the book online. And whether you use the bookstore or the shop online depends on which one is easier to use. Maybe you pass by the bookstore as you walk between lectures and think that it's easier to go there than to wait at home for a courier to drop off your online purchase. Whether you buy the book in the shop or go online, the book which you purchase should be exactly the same. The experience of purchase is different though. The economic approach to this problem is to evaluate the benefits and the costs of the alternatives. We predict that people will choose the alternative which gives them the bigger surplus of benefits over costs. In this case, that's going to be ordering online. Now, we follow this approach throughout the textbook. It's very close to what we mean by the economic definition of rationality. Once we set up a problem which involves choices about how to use resources, we evaluate the costs and benefits of each alternative, assuming that decision makers want to maximise the difference between them. As we go through the book, we will often find that we explain an idea, and then we want to ask questions about it. Here we have a general rule for decision making. Choose the action which gives you the greatest surplus. But in economics, we're not generally interested in what one person does. We want to discuss the behaviour of the market instead. So as a first step to understanding the market for the textbook, let's think about the different decisions that these three students, Zachary, Yusuf and Xanthi, might make. We suppose that they differ in the benefits which they associate with the textbook, or more strictly, the benefits that they associate with the ownership of a new copy of the textbook. They are taking a course where this is the prescribed text. They are concentrating on whether to buy this book or to learn the course material without it. We say that they are willing to pay an amount of money for the book. This should be a measure of the monetary value that they assign to ownership. In the diagram, I've shown Zachary's willingness to pay as being 100. I've shown Yusuf's as 80, and I've shown Xanthi's as 40. Now, much as it would be nice if I only had 3 students in my classes, we expect Xanthi, Yusuf, and Zachary to be part of a much larger class. The downward sloping line then shows how much each student is willing to pay for the book, ordering from the student who's willing to pay the largest amount of money to the student who's willing to pay the smallest amount. The line that we draw in, passing through the points representing Zachary, Yusuf and Xanthi, is another demand curve. It shows the willingness to pay for each book falling as more books are purchased. If we're thinking of it simply as a demand curve though, we would say that it shows how the number of books that will be purchased increases as the market price falls. Now, I expect that when you go to your campus bookshop, you will find piles of textbooks, and every copy of a textbook will be offered for sale at the same price. The bookshop is simply going to make it a take it or leave it offer. In other words, the bookshop would accept any offer to purchase the book at the marked price and will reject any offer below that price. If you want to test this statement, go in and see if you can negotiate a discount on a textbook that you want to purchase. I don't think you'll manage it, and I think that what you will find is also that the willingness to accept offers on the bookshop's behalf will not depend on the number of copies which it has already showed. So we show all of that information by drawing in a supply curve which is a horizontal line. In this case, the bookshop sets a fixed price of 50. We can now bring demand and supply together. The market price which the bookshop has set we've seen as 50, and the rule which we follow is that students will buy the textbook if their willingness to pay is at least 50. In terms of the diagram, we're again looking to see where the downward sloping demand curve meets the horizontal supply curve. And at that point in the diagram, there are 350 copies of the book sold. You will see that in this diagram, we lose our 3 students as we concentrate on the outcome of the market. You can imagine that Yusuf and Zachary have merged into the crowd of 350 people who've turned up to buy the book. Meanwhile, Xanthi has gone off to do something else. She isn't wanting to buy the textbook, perhaps because she's found a second-hand copy of it. Now, thinking about what has happened in this market a little more, we will see that every student who values the book at more than 50, every student who is willing to pay more than 50 for the textbook, has ended up with a copy of it. No student who is willing to pay less than 50 will buy it. There is one student, of course, who values the book at exactly 50, and we're going to say that this student buys it. Now, here we've got a very important definition of efficiency within economics. The people who buy the books are the people who value their copies the most. You should be able to see that since the bookshop sets a fixed price, almost every student is paying less than their willingness to pay. For most students, there is a surplus. The benefit of owning the book is going to be less than the cost of owning it. And so the green shaded triangle shows the total surplus in the market. Markets operate like this because people are free to choose whether they will buy or sell goods. Suppose that Xanthi went into the bookshop and offered to pay £35 for the book. We know that her offer would not be accepted. Her willingness to pay is less than the bookshop's willingness to accept. What this means is that it's impossible for them to agree on a price for the book which will be acceptable to them both. At this point in the story, it is traditional to invoke the concept of the invisible hand, introduced into economics by Adam Smith in the 18th century. Smith argued that all that it takes for markets to achieve an efficient outcome is that people pursue their own interests. Resources flow to the people who value them most. The market, in this sense, is efficient. Of course, that doesn't mean that we have to agree with the way in which the market allocates resources. The efficient outcome is not necessarily a fair one. Arguing against markets and how they operate, though, is perhaps a little like arguing against gravity. We may not like the fact that anything we drop will fall to the ground, but we certainly can't change it. This has just been a very short introduction to what you'll find in Part 1 of Intermediate Microeconomics. There is much more for you to read about, and also you'll find plenty of exercises in the textbook. These are all designed to help you to think about the ideas in Parts 1. And of course, you'll also find plenty of other resources online for you to explore.